Whether it's a novelty work cup, treasured office paint, or company toy mascot, whatever you bring to work to help you be you, Workplace celebrates it. Their easy-to-use features make work feel more familiar, as well as helping everyone work together in new ways. Visit workplace.com/human to discover more. Again, that's workplace.com/human. Workplace from Facebook. Make your place of work a great place to work. As 2021 comes to a close, I wanted to take a look back at some of the best leadership advice we heard from guests from over the past year and a half or so. And believe me, there's been a lot of great leadership advice. I interview around 50 guests every single year, and I've had the privilege of speaking with some truly amazing leaders around the world. And today I want to share some of my favorite conversations. I've picked out some of my favorite clips from 5 guests, and these leaders have brought their people and their companies through the pandemic and all of the changes that came with it. And they continue to thrive despite all the adversity they've been faced. And I really look up to and I admire a lot of these leaders and what they've been able to do. I hope you enjoy taking a look back at some of these conversations as these 5 leaders provide some of their best leadership advice and guidance so that you can implement it inside your organization and inside your life as well. The first clip that you're going to hear is from a conversation that I had with Mark Leisure. He's the CEO of Mccann, a company that produces petrochemicals and plastics with over 5,000 employees around the world. And 50% of the company is owned by Chevron, and 50% is owned by Phillips. Mark has served in leadership roles at Chevron Phillips Chemical and Phillips Petroleum for 3 decades. And we actually got connected because I presented to Mark and his executive leadership team a little while ago. And I thought, hey, you know what? I'm so inspired by the work they're doing. I'd love to be able to have Mark as a podcast guest. So the title of the episode that you're going to hear, it was called How the CEO of Mccann Leads with Trust, Transparency, and Simplicity. Do you have any regular practices or ritual or habits that you do on a daily basis that you think help make you a more effective leader?
I think I'd make sure that I connect individually with people every day. It's easy to get wrapped up, particularly in this environment, to get wrapped up and to get isolated and to get internally focused on what you do. And it's more difficult to engage in walking or managing by walking around in this environment because everyone's trying to stay safe and isolated from a COVID perspective. But I really like to reach out and connect directly with people. For instance, I send out mass emails to our employees, and I will get maybe dozens of responses. I want to make sure that I respond to every one of those because I think that it's important to make sure every employee feels respected, feels like they're an important part of what we do, and that they've got access to me because I'm at the end of the day another employee just like them. And so I want to make sure that that personal connection is there, and that I have an open door policy, which doesn't mean the same thing during COVID. So I've got a kind of an open email policy as well, and it seems to afford me the opportunity to hear what's on people's minds. They're comfortable responding and letting me know what's going on. So I think that is critically important in a job like mine.
You mentioned that when you were earlier on in your career, you followed the advice of a lot of people who saw things in you that you didn't even see in yourself. Can you share some of the advice that these people gave you that ultimately helped you become the CEO of a company?
I think there's key advice and key examples that they set, that you always have to act with high integrity. You always have to do what you say you're going to do, and you have to do it with humility. And some people get confused about that term humility, but you have to have a drive. You have to stand up for what is right, but you can do it in a way that puts others' interests ahead of yours. And when I talk about humility, when I talk about what drives me, that's really what that means, is that you're willing to have enough, or you have enough confidence in yourself that you don't have to put yourself ahead of others, that you know that you have the wherewithal to put others ahead of yourself without losing your own self-respect. And I think that's probably the most important lesson that I've learned from others over the years, that the more you advance in your career, the less it's about what you do, and it's more about what other people do and what you can help them do and the barriers you can remove to help them be successful and engaged.
Now, of course, throughout your career, you were always surrounded by a lot of very smart, very capable people, yet for some reason, you were the one who became the CEO. You were the one who was able to grow and develop and move into roles that other people weren't. So what do you think set you apart from everybody else you were surrounded by? Because, again, plenty of smart people, plenty of capable people around you, only one CEO spot. What do you think about you allowed you to get that role where other people couldn't?
If there's one thing that I think that I've been able to do over the years, it's to be able to translate complex issues into something that people can relate to and understand. And that goes both ways, whether it's explaining to a board member something complex that's going on technically in a plant, or to explain a plant operator how the business really works. I've been able to take those concepts and boil it down to the essence that makes sense to the audience that I'm talking to, the individual I'm talking to. And I think I've always enjoyed doing that. I've always, I think that's been a key part of who I am. And that's the feedback I get, is that people enjoy that in conversation. I'm not sure my kids growing up enjoyed going to the grocery store with me when I'd point out all the things made out of our materials and show them the little marks on the bottom of it. But those that don't have to live with me every day have enjoyed my ability to boil things down to the essence and put it in a relatable context.
It's interesting because it really sounds like it's about the human stuff, being able to connect with people, with other humans. It's not about, I always made the most amount of money. I always, brought in the biggest deals. It was really just about connecting with other human beings.
I think that's a key differentiator. You still have to perform. You still have to deliver results for the company. But what I've learned is how you do that really matters. Things like integrity matter. Things like character matter. You can get great results the wrong way, and I think that is not sustainable. I think people won't want to play with you if you don't play nicely with them. And so I think how you do things is incredibly important.
Have you changed as a leader? Your approach to leadership, your beliefs about leadership, your style of leadership. Has any of that changed as a result of the events that happened in 2020?
I think it's really reinforced some of the basic principles that I've always believed in. And the thing, when I first became CEO in 2017, the thing I really focused on was trust, transparency, and simplicity. And trust means that you've got the character to do the right thing, and you've got the competencies to do it. And that's really embodied in our tagline, performance by design, caring by choice. If you've got the trust-based relationships, that you've got you're transparent with people about what needs to happen and how it needs to happen, and you keep people focused on what's really important by keeping it simple. I think those things were just even more intensely reinforced through COVID and through remote work and through managing through a crisis. We had to trust each other. And it's great that we had those trust-based relationships in place around the globe, because it'd be so hard to get things done. We've done incredible things with some of our joint venture partners in Qatar and in Saudi Arabia that I don't think we would have been able to do if we didn't have trust-based relationships. And if we weren't transparent with our employees about what could happen and what we're trying to do to keep them safe, we wouldn't have been able to accomplish what we accomplished. And we really had to focus on what mattered. We had to eliminate a lot of noise. We had to eliminate a lot of distraction and really boil it down so everyone could focus on what really mattered to A, keep them safe and healthy, and B, continue to be an operating company and produce the things that we need to produce. Many of the things we produced helped fight COVID, helped deliver things around the world to help people stay healthy and to stay sane and to still be able to play in their backyard with toys, the full spectrum. And it really highlighted to our employees the fundamental importance of what we do. We're not just making pellets, we're making things that make people's lives better, that make them safer, that help them go about their daily business in a very efficient and sustainable way.
Now, I know your mantra, as you touched on, is trust, transparency, and simplicity. I wanted to touch on how do those things come to life? So trust, transparency, and simplicity. If somebody says, well, Mark, how does trust come to life and transparency, simplicity? What is it that you do or the company does that allows the employees to feel that that's really happening?
It's critically important that all of our leaders demonstrate those behaviors every day. We talk a lot about that as leaders. You spoke to our leadership conference, our top 75, 80 leaders in the company, and that they really have to embody those characteristics to get it, because people are incredibly perceptive. If they smell something that's inconsistent, they see something that's inconsistent, they're not going to buy it. And they're going to say, okay, you say you want trust, but you're not exhibiting trust. And I see it in the conversations in our facilities, when I go there for plant reviews, when I walk around and talk to people, they are bringing that language back to us in a positive way. They have embraced it. They are holding us accountable for it. And I think that's a beautiful thing. When you've got employees that maybe in the past were afraid to speak up for whatever reason, now they're not afraid to hold top leadership accountable for the things that we're saying. And I think that's an incredibly beautiful thing. And that is just self-reinforcing, and it makes us so much more effective in getting out messaging. We're trying to continue to move our culture to a better and better place. And since we've got that trust in place and they know that we're going to be transparent about why we're doing this, why do you want us to change what we're doing? Everything's working pretty well. Well, this is why, because we can go to a higher level of performance and you're going to have a better place to work, a more enjoyable place to work if we accomplish these things. And they say, okay, let's do this. And under the name of simplicity, we really have simplified the work people do. It's it's quite easy in a corporate center to push out lots of initiatives, to push out lots of things to the folks that are out actually making things happen on the front line. But we realized at one point in time that maybe we were burying those folks with things that we just assumed that they could handle and they could do. But when you stack in the amount of paperwork, the administrative burden that we're stacking on top of them, and you actually went out and talked to them about what their lives were like, they said, oh, we're really trying to do this, but we're just getting snowed under by all this. And I said, okay, let's step back and find out what's really important, what we really need to get you to do and to free you up to have the time to focus on what's right. It cleared the decks and it helped us unleash a lot of potential out there that was getting burdened by unnecessary work. And now that we've got this system in place called Performance by Design, where we're encouraging everyone to challenge the status quo and to have that kind of conversation with their leadership. And I have to tell you that we've had record-breaking safety and environmental performance in the last couple of years. We've had record-setting operations in our plants producing more than they've ever produced, and we've had record-setting sales. And so by unleashing the potential of every employee, there is an incredible payout as well. And you can see it in the morale. Their employees are happier, more energized. They've got a hunger for this. And we, as leaders, have to figure out how to perpetuate that and how to encourage that.
This next clip is from Shelly Archambault. She is the former CEO of a company called MetricStream, a Silicon Valley-based governance, risk, and compliance software company. And Shelly is also the author of a book called Unapologetically Ambitious: Take Risks, Break Barriers, and Create Success on Your Own Terms. She also serves on the boards of Verizon, Nordstrom, Roper Technologies, and Okta. The title of this episode was How to Take Risks, Break Barriers, and Create Your Own Success. And I was very inspired by the story that Shelly told. We actually grew up in the same part of Southern California in Granada Hills. She was there several years, or quite a few years before I was. But I could relate to a lot of the stories that she was sharing because I was familiar with the areas. And I loved some of her insights and anecdotes, especially around creating your own luck, which you will hear a little bit about in this clip. I guess we can talk about your book now because I love the way that you organized it. And you had these great sections in here, which are early lessons, strategize for success, living the plan, swerve, and improving the odds. And so what I wanted to do is maybe go through each one of those sections and pick out maybe one or two things. I have things that I'm personally interested in, but if you have a part of that section that you think people would benefit most from, then we can talk about that. For early lessons, I loved the first one. There were three sections that really stood out to me. One was create your own luck, one was set your goals, and one was imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. So create your own luck, I definitely want to go over because I think that's a very important concept for people to just understand that they have more accountability and control than they realize. So what does create your own luck actually mean? And how could that apply, you think, for a lot of people today who want to be in leadership roles?
So creating your own luck to me is positioning yourself so that when opportunity shows up, comes around, happens, you actually have the ability to take advantage of it.
Yeah.
So it's having, yes, the right skills, yes, the right experience, but I'll also tell you it's having the right attitude is a big piece of it as well. So that you're open, right, to the opportunity when it comes. And I've always believed that planning can also improve your odds to be lucky, for luck to happen. It's interesting when, an example would be when, we're going to Wharton. All right. So I decide that, all right, I want to be in business. So I need to go to Wharton, and I want to go to Wharton undergrad, which was very hard to get into, but I thought I could save myself from having to go to grad school, right? If I went to Wharton undergrad. Well, you could say I was lucky that I got in, except even before I knew what I wanted to do, I was getting good grades because I knew I needed options, right? So yes, I was lucky, but frankly, I actually helped myself being lucky by making sure that I got good grades, was very involved in school, in the organizations, right? All those different things. Everything that happens when I set a plan, I try to assume it's going to happen and then do things to get ready for it. So when it does happen, I'm lucky that I can take advantage of it.
I think it was the CEO of Honeywell who I was interviewing on this podcast, and he was telling me that there's basically no substitute for hard work, or maybe it was at Home Depot. Somebody was sharing a story of how, they went through several jobs where they were not happy. They had leaders who didn't treat them well, but they consistently focused on their performance and they consistently did really well. Because it's very easy if you're in an environment where you don't think people support you to slack off and then you never get promoted.
Exactly.
And he was telling me this story of, even though the environment wasn't great, he consistently worked hard, and then an opportunity opened up and they said, well, who's going to be a good fit for this opportunity? And they said, oh, so-and-so is working really hard. They're really great at this. That person should be promoted. So it very much reminds me of that idea of, just kind of waiting for the right moment. It's like what you see in all those movies, right? Like wait for the right moment and then we strike. And it's just planning that whole time because you will get that opportunity.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, an example at IBM was when I got to IBM, and I'm thinking everybody wants to be CEO, right? How am I going to differentiate myself? So I looked at what IBM did poorly, right? What was IBM not good at? And frankly, it was marketing. They didn't even have a chief marketing officer. They called sales reps marketing reps, right? I mean, they didn't know what marketing was. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to major in marketing. And every staff opportunity, every project was marketing oriented. I did. Well, Lou Gerstner comes to IBM and says, there's no marketing. First job he hires, a chief marketing officer, Abby Comstam. She looks around and says, who are the people that know marketing? My first executive job was a marketing job.
Yeah, no, I love that because a lot of people, so I'm trying to think the specific action could be for people who are listening or watching? I suppose it's to just be aware of what's going on around you and consistently making sure that you're working on yourself and doing good quality work so that when the opportunity comes up, you can kind of pounce on it.
Oh, wait, but I want to add one more, because that almost sounds like work hard and good things will happen.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that's the case at all. All right. I mean, work hard, put your head down, and you're going to miss out on a lot of things.
Yeah.
So it's important that you make sure you let people know what you're actually doing and what you do, and that sounds so basic. What do you mean? Well, I'll give you a simple example. In our culture, right? Common way to meet people, break the ice, is you say, oh, what do you do? Right? What do you do? And somebody will say, oh, I'm vice president of operations for so-and-so. Do you know what they do, Jacob?
No.
No, we answer with titles. As much as we fight for titles, titles are meaningless. Okay, they're meaningless because a title has completely different responsibilities, company to company, heck, even within the same company, right? Department to department. So take the time to tell people what you do. What do you do? Oh, I'm vice president of operations. I'm responsible for all the strategic accounts for the Western region for blah, 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 blah. 20 seconds. Tell them what you do. Because then when they're talking to somebody later on and somebody says, I'm looking for somebody who knows how to work with strategic accounts and blah, 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 they're going to think of you. If you just said you're head of operations, you're not in their mind.
Yeah. And I love that. That's great advice. The next thing that I wanted to go over, well, there was two other ones that I really liked. Set your goals and imposter syndrome. So maybe we could start off with set your goals. You talked about 16 years old, you set that goal for yourself. Probably a lot of people at 16 didn't know what they wanted to do. But can you talk about the importance of setting your goals, and maybe for a lot of people who are adults, how can they go about doing that in the right way?
Sure. So setting a goal is really just setting an objective for yourself that's out in the future, right? What are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to create, right? Whatever the right verb is there. And the reason that's important is if you don't have something that you're actually trying to do, no direction in which you're trying to head, then frankly, it almost doesn't matter what you go do next.
Yeah.
People come to me often to get advice. Oh, what should I do next? Here's what I've done, blah, blah. And my first question is always the same. Well, what do you want to do? What's your goal? And if the answer is, I don't know, then I have a really harsh response, which is, then it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't. Now, sometimes they'll tell me, oh, I want to do blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, great. Who else knows? Nobody? Maybe their spouse?
Yeah, if nobody else knows.
Right. That doesn't work either. You have to let people know what you want. Otherwise, they can't help you. And it's been my experience that people will help you if they know what you want, if they can. So let people help you. So setting goals is really all about picking that objective in the future. And honestly, if you can only think 2 years ahead, then that's better than nothing, right? I don't care how far ahead, however far ahead you can think. Pick that goal. Yeah. Ask yourself what has to be true for you to achieve that goal. And then ask yourself, how do you make that true? Which is basically the plan. What has to be true? And then how do I make it true? That's how I think about everything. And that's how to make the plan.
What do you do if you don't meet your goals or you fail?
You just reassess and you look at changing your plan. I don't change the goal. I mean, I told you really early on, right? My goal was to be CEO of IBM. Well, you didn't announce that I was CEO of IBM because I wasn't. So you say, okay, I failed at that. I kept the goal though, which was to become a CEO. I just changed the plan. And that's why there's a whole section called Swerve, right? Which we'll talk about. But don't give up on your goals because things get hard or you hit a stumbling block, right? Or trust me, obstacles, issues, problems, unexpected situations, 2020, right? All these things will happen. That's okay. Just figure out a different path, a different plan, but don't give up on your goal.
The other thing that I think is really important, and you called it, obviously what it is imposter syndrome. So have you dealt with imposter syndrome? I mean, can you share a story maybe of when you were an executive at any of the organizations you were a part of? Did you experience imposter syndrome, and what did that look like, and how did you battle it or conquer it?
Listen, I have been suffering from imposter syndrome my entire life. Okay, my entire life. So I can't tell you how to conquer it, because I still do from time to time, which is ridiculous, right? Look at the things I've done. It's crazy, but I do. But what I can tell you is how to deal with it, how to make sure it doesn't stop you. Okay. So, I mean, when have I experienced it? Man, just about every major step. It's like, okay, you get the new job. You're now responsible for global XYZ. And you're thinking, I don't know enough to be able to do this. Wait till I figure out that I don't have all the skills that they expect, right? Do I really? It's that imposter syndrome, is that voice in your head that is basically highlighting all the doubts you have about yourself, right? Except it's blaring, right? What makes you think you can do this? You can't do this. And then you get, oh my God. I mean, that's what it is. Well, here's the key with imposter syndrome. Studies show everybody suffers from it at some point or another. And women more than men, and people of color and women of color the most. So what does that tell you? It's not personal. It's in the air. If everybody's suffering from it, it's in the air. I think it's because we live in a world that's so judgmental. So to me, it's like television. Television's everywhere. Television looks real, sounds real. It can even feel real, right? You get scared, you get nervous, you get this voice, same thing. Looks real, sounds real, feels real. It's not real. It's not real. So try to work through that. That's what I do. I try to tell myself it's not real. And then if that doesn't work, I feel it only when people offer me jobs, right? I step into my first executive job. I walk into my first boardroom, right? Whatever that is, that's when you feel it. Well, listen, you wouldn't be there if people didn't think you belonged. They wouldn't have invited you. So even if you don't believe in yourself, believe in them, right? Believing in you. And worst case.
I like that, yeah.
Yeah. And in worst case, fake it. Act like you are comfortable. Act like you are confident. Act like you know what you are doing until you do. Because eventually you will. You always do. You always ultimately figure it out.
David Cote is the former chairman and CEO of Honeywell, and he's also the author of the best-selling book called Winning Now and Winning Later: How Companies Can Succeed in the Short Term While Investing in the Long Term. During David's time at Honeywell, David fixed a toxic work culture and grew the company's market cap from around $20 billion to $120 billion, delivering returns of over 800%. Currently, David is executive chairman of Vertiv Holdings Co., which is a global data center products and service provider. He's also a member of the Aspen Economic Strategy Group on Foreign Relations and the Conference of Montreal. And in this clip from David, you will hear how he actually defines leadership and his advice on how to lead through tough times. If you end up listening to the full conversation that I had with David, it was actually very interesting and surprising to hear where he came from. He basically grew up in poverty, and he ended up turning his life around, going from, living from poverty to becoming the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. And the story around why he did it, how he did it, and actually what transpired as a result is really fascinating. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation with David Cote, the former CEO of Honeywell. How do you define leadership?
Well, I break it into three pieces that I say are necessary for somebody to be a good leader. The first one is the ability to motivate a large group of people. I'll also say it's the most visible, but it's only 5% of the job. Motivating a large group of people isn't that hard. And you can do it a number of different ways. It's not just a great speech. It's how you act, the way you conduct yourself. There's a number of ways to do it. But a lot of people will look at somebody who gives a great speech and say, oh man, that person's a great leader. And they don't realize, no, they're just a great orator. It doesn't mean they're a great leader at that point. The next two are the really big steps. The second step is, can you pick the right direction? And too many leaders can sound great. They do the fad surfing. They can be very conversant on whatever the hot topic is out there. But do they make the right decisions to put an organization on the right path, in the right direction? And I oftentimes say, if you got everybody motivated, and then you spend 40 years wandering in the desert, you're probably not a good leader. That's not you're not good for the organization. Kind of a corollary to that is that one of the most undervalued things a leader does, but one of the most valuable things a leader does, is avoid trouble in the first place. And the press gives no credit to leaders for avoiding a problem because it's not noticeable. It's not news. A lot more attention is paid to the company or the leader who gets into trouble. And then if they can get themselves out of it, well, that's an additional story. But the leader who avoids all that trouble, you never hear about it. The third piece, and this is just as important, is you've mobilized everybody, you've picked the right direction. Can you now get the entire organization moving step by step in that direction? And I still think there are still too many leaders who think, look, I make the big decisions and then I have great people and they make it happen.
Yeah.
Well, I like to say there's a difference between delegation and abdication. And that's abdication. With delegation, you find ways to verify for yourself, are things happening out there the way you think they are? And you make sure that whatever you decide to do truly has a logical implementation path, that you're not trying to be too broad, you're not under-resourced, but you've picked the right focal points, resourced them right, and then you have an independent way of finding out, is it working that way? And it's why I spent 500-600 hours a year on the plane traveling around the world. I mean, I visited over 100 countries and visit customers, go with sales guys, do town halls, factory visits, just to see, are things happening the way I'm hearing they are? And it's important when you do that to look for falsification bias instead of confirmation bias. And leaders, once you've made a decision, all of us have a tendency to see all the facts aligned consistent with that decision. They're just all that much more obvious to us than they were before. While that can be good, as a leader, what you need to be looking for are, what are those facts that are inconsistent with my having made a good decision here? They just don't quite fit. Am I missing something? Was there something about my decision that isn't right? And leaders need to be looking for that falsification bias constantly.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. Of course, I have to ask because there's a lot of change happening in the world now. Things like Black Lives Matter with COVID. Are you seeing leadership change? Have you seen leadership change over the past few months as a result of what's happening in the world now?
I don't think what's required to be a good leader changes over time. And if you went back and said, okay, so how did Julius Caesar lead versus how did today's leaders lead? I think you'd find that a lot of the leadership qualities they had were the same, because you're dealing largely with human nature when you're doing this, and that doesn't change all that much over the millennia. That also means, though, that leaders need to adapt. Leaders need to evolve. And it's always a big focus with me was that whether you're a company, an organization, a country, or a person, you had to evolve, whether it's learning how to be more self-aware about yourself, your company and the things that you're focused on, your country and the things that it's focused on. You have to keep evolving. And this is definitely a point of evolution. And every company, every leader has to be able to adapt to it, understand it, and do the right things.
Yep. You have a section in your book where you talk about leading through tough times. Can you share any stories about some of the tough times that you had to lead through and what you did to be able to get through those times?
Well, I'd have to say the toughest one was the Great Recession of 2008, 2009.
Yep.
And that was quite painful. And as I like to say about recessions, they're all slightly different. And every time we have one, we think it's the worst ever. And usually we say that because we're in the middle of it then, and it's quite painful. And, you look at 2001 and it was the plane crash, and oh my God, how unique is this? Now we end up with a Great Recession and the financial calamity. Oh my God, how unique is this? Now we end up in COVID with a healthcare crisis. Oh my God, how unique is this? And you have to at some point say to yourself, well, I guess there is an aspect of uniqueness to every recession you deal with. That being said, they're all alike in that the actions you need to take in order to survive it and the kind of leadership you need to provide are the same. That doesn't change over time. And I could also add, every recession sucks. And everybody you need to know it as a leader. Is just right from the beginning. You're confronted with two options for everything, one bad, one less bad. And I used to tell folks all the time when they'd say, God, I'm working harder than ever and at an unbelievably less rewarding time. And all I could say is that's right. And that's why they call it a recession and they don't call it a party. It's not fun. But if we do the right things in the middle of a tough time, that will cause us to come out a much stronger company than our competitors. And the advice that I give to people is to, one, don't panic. Two, make sure that you keep thinking independently, as we talked about before.
Yep.
Three, never forget to put your customer first. Don't let customer service suffer in any way. And four is be thinking about the recovery, even while you're in the middle of the recession. Because when you're in the middle of a recession, it's very easy to start thinking it's going to be like this forever. My life is horrible. The economy's horrible. Nothing's ever going to be good again. And this is one where I rely on history and say, well, in the 240 years that we've been a country, despite every bad recession we've had, good times do come back. So how do you make sure you don't lose sight of that? And that you manage to think about, okay, how am I preparing for the recovery in this tough time? And there's this old saying I've always been fond of that says, when you're up to your butt in alligators, it's tough to remember the original goal was to drain the swamp. So if you're a leader, you feel like you are covered in alligators. You've got 120 hours worth of work, 80 hours to get it done. And you're sitting there going, Dave, I hear what you're saying, but for crying out loud, I'm just trying to survive right now. I don't have enough time to think about the recovery. And this is where I say, this is where good leaders separate from mediocre leaders. Because a good leader finds a way to take at least a couple hours a week to put their head above the fray and look around and say, okay, all these short-term actions I'm taking, is it going to make a difference for where I'm trying to go for the long term? Is it consistent with what I'm trying to do? And if it's not, what do I do differently so that it will be? Those are the people who will do well going into the recovery and truly distinguish themselves.
Whatever you bring to work to help you be you, Workplace from Facebook celebrates it. Their familiar features help everyone work together in new ways. To make your place of work a great place to work, visit workplace.com/human. That's workplace.com/human. This next clip you're going to hear is from a conversation that I had with Rita McGrath, and she's a professor at Columbia Business School, and she's also the best-selling author of a book called Seeing Around Corners: How to Spot Inflection Points in Business Before They Happen. Back in 2020, she was ranked number 5 on the Thinkers 50 list for her work in strategy, innovation, and entrepreneurship, and for being a champion of harnessing disruptive influences for competitive advantage. She's widely recognized as a leading expert on leading innovation and growth during times of uncertainty, and we really had a fascinating conversation. There was a lot there around that futurist perspective, which those of you who tune into my content know that I love to talk about. So I loved Rita's perspective on thinking like a futurist and really what it means to see around corners. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Rita McGrath. Okay, so if your book is not about predicting the future, when you say seeing around corners, just for people watching, for people listening, what do you mean when you say?
I mean that you're opening your mind to possibilities that are now made real because of a strategic inflection point. So let me give you a couple of examples that might bring it to life. So I was working with a company that does basically road service, motor club kind of things. And we were working on a bunch of different scenarios. And the two uncertainties that they were most concerned about were What is younger people's attitude about driving going to be? Are younger people still going to view getting their license as a rite of passage and the path to freedom and independence, or are they going to be more or less indifferent to it? So, Q Uber or other mechanisms that make owning a car just not that desirable. And the other big uncertainty was, are we moving into a world where we've got electric vehicles or even autonomous vehicles where roadside repairs are more or less desirable? And putting the two together, we sketched out 4 different strategic scenarios. And the one that, of course, was most devastating was young people aren't interested in driving and cars don't need to be repaired anyway. And so that kind of makes your existence as a motor club, irrelevant. And it wasn't that I'm predicting that's going to happen, but what it causes them to do strategically is think about that as well. If that were a possibility, what would we be doing now? What would we be thinking about? What options would we have in our portfolio? What other kinds of services might we offer to remain relevant? So it's more about expanding your range of possibilities that you're considering, and then really being prepared to challenge your own assumptions. And I think that's really where the seeing around corners part is so valuable. Because if you think about it,
I love that.
any business grows up with a set of assumptions about what's possible and what's not. And what an inflection point does is it really changes the nature of those assumptions.
Yep.
So let's take another example, because I think this is a really fun one. If you take Nike, right? I mean, iconic global brand. And for decades, Nike's, one of their competitive secret sauces was getting just the right merchandise to just the right retailer. So if you were shopping in a Dick's Sporting Goods, you'd be exposed to different kinds of products than if you were shopping in, say, Hammacher Schlemmer or something that was very niche. And Nike has, in the last couple of years, basically stepped away from those capabilities, which are painstakingly built up over decades of experience, to switch to what they call the direct-to-consumer offensive, all of which is made possible by the advent in data collection, fast storage, cloud storage, and they've leveraged things they've been working on for years, which is things like Nike Plus, adding a digital layer on top of what runners were doing, to the point where today they're basically saying, we don't need most of the retailers we've been working with. We don't even need Amazon. We are going to create an exciting customer experience all on our own. I mean, that's a really courageous thing to do.
Yeah.
And if you follow the history of that, though, it wasn't like they predicted direct to consumer was going to be what was going on, but they had enough investments and sort of feet on the street, not to use a pun, but enough sort of paying attention to what was really going on, that when this all became possible, they said, whoa, we could do this.
So thinking in terms of the scenarios and possibilities. So it's something that I think is crucial. Why do you think we struggle with it so much?
I think there are a number of reasons. I think the first reason is that if you've achieved a level of success at anything, it has a recipe that goes with it. And what a strategic inflection point does, or some people call them disruptions, what they do is they make those recipes invalid. And so there's both a sort of a reluctance to say, oh, this makes my history, my, library, my business model, whatever it is, it makes it no longer relevant. So there's a kind of a unwillingness to see that reality. It's almost like a coffin salesman, right? They come up to you now. Okay, look, we know you're going to die. How big do you want it to be? How deep? Da, da, da. Nobody wants to have that conversation, right? I mean, it takes a powerful sort of reason to have that conversation. So I think the first one is this self-obsoleting nature of disruptions and inflection points. I think the second one is a lot of people just haven't had to do that in their careers. I mean, if you think about the people that you've interviewed, my guess is 70% of them got where they were by being fantastic operators, just squeezing every last bit of margin out of an operating system, running the supply chain till it hums. Most of our senior leadership, that's what they're picked for. I mean, if you think of most CEOs, they are not company founders. They are not the ones that rode an innovation to be a multi-billion-dollar business. And that's not a knock on them. I mean, established organizations are built to replicate a well-understood business model. But what that does mean is by the time they have to make these future-oriented decisions, they don't have a rich body of experience to draw on, which is actually, I think, one of the things that really distinguishes founder-led companies from others. which is those founders have been through it, right? They've
Yeah.
they've lived with having to make payroll, and they've lived with things not working out, and they've had to pivot. And so I think there's a lot more just skill that they've got when those kinds of conditions appear. So that's the second one. I'd say
One question about that,
Oh, sure.
really quick. So would you say, so it sounds like traditionally being an operator and an amazing operator was to be a top executive or leader in a company. If you were to look maybe 5-10 years in the future, do you think that we're going to see less CEOs and senior executives who are operators and they're going to need to possess something else? Or is an operator still going to be enough to be a top leader at a company?
Ooh, that's a great question. My gut is that it's not going to be enough. And the reason it's not going to be enough is that if you go back in time, if I were a CEO in 1955, my business was probably an awful lot like it was in 1935. And if I extrapolated forward, it was probably going to be a lot in 1975 like it was in 1955. And so being an operator, you could kind of spend much of a career doing that. I think in the future, as competitive advantages get compressed, we're going to need people who are capable of managing the entire life cycle. So who can manage innovation, not necessarily who can do innovation, but who can understand what it takes to manage it, who can indeed manage the exploitation phase, but who are also courageous about what I call disengagement or reconfiguration. When, this thing is now run its course, we need to exit, and we need to do so, in a way that preserves what's valuable, but allows us to pull resources to where they're most needed. So I do think in the future, CEOs are not going to be able to be just operators. I think they're going to have connections into these other activities.
Okay. Sorry, you were on your third point. I didn't want to...
I think the third reason that human beings are just really bad at making predictions is that we don't know what's happening at the edges. And by the edges, I mean, where are the new technologies coming along that could really radically change how we do business? Where are the kinds of people with new ideas? What is it people 2 generations away from us are really thinking about? So one of the practices I think that anybody can use, anybody watching this or listening can use, is train yourself to regularly get out to whatever you think of as the edges of your organization. So it could be going to a conference that isn't from your own industry. It could be taking a course. It could be working with diverse talents to brainstorm ideas. It could be listening to shows like this one where, you're not necessarily hearing what you hear every day. And I think that really is important. If I look at companies that got taken by surprise by an inflection point, what you often see is a lot of homogeneity. And that's on multiple dimensions: cultural, gender, geographic, whatever. They're all like little carbon copies of each other. And so to introduce something new in that conversation is really hard.
Yeah. So you mentioned inflection points, but we didn't actually talk about what an inflection point is. So how do you explain an inflection point?
So an inflection point to me is some typically external shift that has a 10x impact on the taken for granted assumptions on which we are operating. In business, it tends to be something that makes your current key metrics obsolete or out of date. In life in general, it's something that really changes the nature of possibilities that you have or that you're confronted with. And if we think about people that have had inflection points that have really taken them to new heights, it's often quite interesting. It's not, it's not necessarily what you might think, but it might be, you get exposed. I'll use an example. Sylvia Acevedo, who's the CEO of the Girl Scouts, tells a really inspiring story of growing up, very poor family, Mexican immigrants, really no, if you took her at sort of 10 years old and looked at her, you would have thought, okay, not really a future. And yet she describes how being part of the Girl Scouts at an early age exposed her to people, especially her scout leader, who convinced her that she could do this, that she could persevere, that she could, in what she did, go to Stanford. She joined NASA. She became a rocket scientist. I mean, fabulous history. But the inflection point represented by that opening of an opportunity, is just that's the kind of nature personally of what one's like.
So somebody actually asked live, they're saying, do you think that CEOs or leaders, does this mean that they need to be generalists to be more successful in the future?
Well, I'll tell you what the research evidence shows, which is that there was a great study that was done by, I want to say, Korn Ferry using LinkedIn data. And the great thing about LinkedIn data is we tell LinkedIn everything about our professional lives,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, we
And
do.
and what they found in their sample was that people that became C-level executives tended not to have linear careers. They tended to have what you might think of as zigzag careers. So maybe they started out in marketing and then they did a stint in operations, and maybe they were in aerospace and went into fashion for a while or whatever. So I don't know that you have to be a generalist, because that's often seen as sort of pejorative. Oh, they're
Yeah.
mass. What is it? Investor in everything, master it, and that phrase. But I do think what it points to is the importance of having a variety of experiences in your toolkit.
The last clip here is from Chris Mccann, the CEO of 1-800-Flowers. They are a floral and gourmet food gift retailer and distribution company with over 3,000 employees. Funny story, I actually got connected with Chris because of my wife, Blake, who also interviewed Chris for her book and for her content that she was working on. So thank you, Blake. The company was started back in 1976 when Chris's older brother opened his first flower shop. And in the 1980s, Chris joined his brother in the business, and they've been working together ever since. In this interview, Chris is going to talk about what he learned from other leaders that he came to know, including the CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, and the former CEO of AXA Financial, Ed Miller. He also talks about crucial things he learned about leading during turbulent times. One of my favorite things about this conversation with Chris is that he learned about leadership not through an MBA program or from going to school, but literally through the hard knocks of leadership on the streets of New York, who he surrounded himself with. And I think this is such a valuable lesson for all of us out there who strive to be great leaders. It's oftentimes who you surround yourself with that's going to make who you are as a leader. So how did you learn everything along the way? Because it sounds like, you never went through a leadership development program because it was a flower shop. I mean, you just had to figure this stuff out. So how did you grow to learn all these things, to learn to lead? Did you start off as CEO?
No, I started off as a delivery person, probably. But it was shortly after that I was working for Jim. When I came in to join him full time, I guess it was January of '84. And not too long after that, he did put me in charge of the 12 retail stores that we had. Jim was only in the business part-time. He had a full-time job as a social worker for troubled boys in Rockaway Beach, Queens, called St. John's Home for Boys. So this flower gig was just a side thing for him. And once he put me in charge of the 12 stores, the way he likes to tell the story is that, he put me in charge of 12, and the next thing he knew, we had 3, which was true, but he leaves out usually the fact that we were doing more revenue and more profit out of those 3 stores than we were out of the 12. And it was really, Jacob, because the consumer started to change. We had adopted, there was a new technology at the time called 800 telephone service. We adopted a couple of 800 numbers. Customers started calling on the phone and just having their flowers delivered as opposed to coming into the store. So we just did some analysis on the data and found out we could be much more profitable with less of those doors out there and become more of a telephonic commerce company. And that's really what began the whole process of the transformation into 1-800-Flowers.
Wow. So it literally came from the 1-800 number that you had almost 35, 36 years ago.
Exactly. And, when you talk about, how did we learn things along the way, we learned by doing, we learned by being involved. And it goes beyond that later on. I often think of a couple of specific stories. When we were first getting going, and first, 800-Flowers, first off, was actually a failed business from Dallas, Texas, that started up in 1984. And it was we saw them come on. They spent a ton of money advertising the business. It was a bunch of venture capitalists and business people that invested and went through about $30 million of money within 2 years, and then reached out to us to help save the company. And over the course of about a year and a half is how we took control of that failed entity, which meant we acquired a phone number and $7 million of debt, which then we continued to work off. But in those early days, I remember one time we took over one of our flower shops in Bayside, Queens, and took all of the giftware and the floral out of it and put telemarketing stations right in the middle of the store. And as the phone company was bringing in the lines, my brother and I would watch what they were doing, and we'd watch and say, now, how do you connect the outside wire to the inside wire? And they would show us, and we'd just ask lots of questions. Or the same thing I remember when we installed our first computer system. And we would be side by side with the people installing, just asking questions. We're not technologists ourselves, but we needed to learn what this technology was and how to manage it and how to do it. And that's the way, really, the beginnings of my understanding of technology, and I've led the technology side of our business ever since.
Wow. And what about the leadership side of stuff? How did you figure out the people aspect of the business?
Well, me personally, I learned a lot from my brother on that. Jim brought a mantra to our business from what he learned as a social worker. And he tells a story that, again, these were really tough teenage kids from the streets of New York that he was dealing with. And if he wanted to connect with them and get to help them, he realized he needed to build a relationship with them first. So he created this mantra that rolls into our company: you build a relationship first, you do business second. So that was really the beginning. Whether it's with a customer, whether it's with an employee, you need to understand and learn about these people and how to connect with them, and do so in a very honest, transparent manner. I've also been fortunate. I did take a leadership course then later on, an executive leadership course at Cornell University, which I found very helpful. But also along the way, out of this process of building relationships, Jim and I were both very fortunate to build relationships with some of the most enigmatic business leaders of our time. One in particular is Jamie Dimon, who heads up J.P. Morgan. Jamie also grew up in Queens, and we got to know Jamie throughout our life, and we would spend time with him from time to time and just absorb and listen to the way he thinks about things and soak everything in. I remember one of the most important things that Jamie said to us at one point was, he said, you guys spend way too much time trying to get everybody in the company to understand how the whole business works. He says, and you can't. Not everybody's going to understand that. He said, but what they need to understand is how what they do connects to the company's success. And he said, because people want to go home from their job every day knowing whether or not they contributed to success. They're not just in there to punch the clock. And that was a transforming thing for us, is to really make sure that when we do this now, and I really think it helps with leadership, is to make sure everybody understands. They don't need to understand the whole picture. You just need your senior management team to understand that. Everybody else needs to really understand how their piece contributes.
There are two, I think, important things here, and maybe even more, that I just want to make sure people realize. So first, when it comes to the technology piece, because I think a lot of leaders who are not technology leaders tend to shy away from technology. So I loved your approach of asking questions, just being around it, understanding that you're not necessarily a technologist, but you need to be aware of technology. So I think that's a really, really crucial point for people to understand. And the second, I think, is part of what shaped your leadership. It's not necessarily just taking courses, but it's shaped by the people around you. And so I think that's a very important thing for leaders to remember, is who you surround yourself by, both inside of work, outside of work, also has a dramatic impact on your leadership, not just going to get an MBA at some fancy school.
Yeah, very much so. And my brother and I often said that, we got our MBA by meeting these different people that we got the opportunity to learn from as we did business with them throughout. Another great leader that I learned a lot from is a gentleman, Ed Miller, who was CEO of AXA Financial. And prior to that, he led manufacturers Hanover, the integration with Chemical Bank and into Chase Bank. Just a great leader. And as we were growing in our company, we had people that were with us for a long time. And sometimes you run into a situation where the job outgrows the person. But yet the person was very loyal to you and very important in growing the business early on. And letting that person go would be very, very difficult to do. And I remember having conversations with Ed about this. And he said, "You're not being loyal to that person." I said, "Well, I sure am. I'm keeping them in their job." He said, "No, loyalty is making sure that every person on your team is in a position to succeed, whether inside your company or outside your company. So if a job has outgrown someone and you don't have a position in your company, it's your responsibility to do everything you can to get them the right job outside of your company." And that really transformed the way I thought about people.
I love that, because so many people associate tenure with loyalty. So
Right.
just because you're there for a long time means you're loyal. But I think you make a great point. I mean, what if you have people at your company who are there for a long time, but they're unhappy? They're not engaged. They really don't want to be there. And you're doing everything you can to keep them there. That's not really helping anybody.
It's exactly right. And helping them, and we've done this over time where we've gotten so many communications back from people basically thanking us for letting them go, and forcing them into a new career, advising them into a new career, but supporting them along the way.
And that's an important distinction to make, is that you support them and guide them along the way. You don't just kind of cut them off and say, "See you later."
Exactly.
So I'm also quite curious, transitioning a little bit to, today we live and work in pretty turbulent times. But before we talk about how do you lead in today's world, I'm curious, have you, during the course of your career, have you had other experiences where you've had to lead during tough or difficult or uncertain times? And if so, maybe you can share what those times were and what you did.
Yeah, there's been a number of times, and as I think about it, I think certainly about the crisis that we're in now. But I'll go back to a very small moment in time. Critically important, but small compared to whether it be the financial crisis, which was a difficult time that we led through, whether it be the terrorist attacks of 9/11 that we had to lead our company through, or certainly these times. But in the very beginning of our business, as we took over the responsibility of the 800 flowers business, and we merged it into the retail store in Queens with these telemarketing stations in it that I told you we built, and we brought in a new computer system. I wasn't really involved in that part of the business. We had this other lady that was running that part of the business for us, and I was still running the retail store operations. However, we knew that we were hearing lots of customer complaints in those early days that they placed an order, but it never got delivered. And again, we were installing this new computer system at the time. And I remember talking to my brother when we were at a Special Olympics event in upstate New York. Our middle brother, Kevin, is a Special Olympian. And we were gathered around as a family at this event. And I remember talking to Jim saying that, this needs to get fixed. It can really cause a problem if this, and it's starting to get a bigger issue. So that day, driving home from upstate New York, I basically drew out on a yellow pad a whole audit system of how we would track an order from the beginning to the end in this new computer system, and where we would put these traps in place. And I got into the office at like 6 a.m. the next day, into the flower shop. And as the computer team started coming in, again, they were in the middle of installing this. I grabbed them all together. We sat down. We put these yellow sheets up on the wall at different places. And I said, I want these trap points at all these traps at all these different points, so that we can track this down and understand it. And we did, and we were able to identify where the error was. And for me, that was me showing one of the first times where I had the ability to really show true leadership, not just to others, but to myself, where I took an area that I didn't know about, in this case, computer technology, but I was able to work with the team to help them figure it out and emphasize that it had to be figured out. There was no choice. So that was a small area. And then, as I mentioned, the big areas of leading through challenging times is certainly the 9/11 terrorist attacks at the World Trade Center, the financial crisis, and then the current pandemic that we're in.
So how do you lead through those major changes, those major tragedies, 9/11, the recession now? I'm sure there are some common elements between all of them, but also they're pretty different events. So what do you do as a leader when something like that happens?
Well, I think one of the most important things is communication and visibility. And even in today's time, let me just stay on communication for a minute. In each of these events, the need to step up communication so that the people in your company know that you're on top of things, know that you're there, know that you're looking out for their best interests is critical. And then as we look at the communication, visibility is important. Now, in the case of 9/11, and the company was smaller at the time, we were able to stand up and basically be in front of everyone in the company. As the financial crisis hit, we're a bigger company. We needed to use teleconferencing really to make sure everyone was there and on a regular basis. In this pandemic, being visible is even more difficult. I'm on, we're using Microsoft Teams, and I'm on Teams or Skype calls or Zoom calls constantly all day long, a lot with my direct report team. But I need to be visible into each of the other teams as well. So I'm jumping in and out of their department meetings as much as I possibly can, just so that people see they're visible. But also, I think a key component here is re-emphasizing the vision of your company, your values, your mission. Because in this world of turmoil of any of these events, people are fearful of change. Their lives have just been disrupted. It's been changed dramatically, and there's a level of fear there. By focusing and constantly reminding people the job that we do and our vision to inspire human expression, connection, and celebration, and tying everything we do back to that, gives them a sense of normalcy, gives them a sense of a bedrock that amidst all this change, nothing is changing in our business. And especially in our business, as I mentioned earlier, Jacob, it's also a reminder to every employee of our company the very special role that we get to play in helping people express, connect, and celebrate. The trust our customers put in our hands to deliver an expression for them, to deliver a smile, is a very meaningful moment. And one of the ways we reinforce that is to constantly share information from our customers about their, why they sent this order, how much it meant to them. We often get these notes back, and we share that information with our team as much as we possibly can.
I hope you enjoyed this very special episode of The Future of Work. And if you want to go back and listen to the full episodes, you can find them all on my website, thefutureorganization.com. And there's a little tab there called Podcast. Click on the Podcast tab, and you will see all of them. If you enjoy the show, of course, I would love it if you take a couple seconds and leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever your preferred channel is. Thanks again for tuning in, and I will see you next time. Thanks again for tuning into the show, and don't forget to go to 6leadershiptrends.com to grab a copy of my brand new PDF, which is going to walk you through the 6 trends that are shaping leadership and what it means to be a leader, and it will also give you action items for what you should be doing for each one of these 6 trends to adapt and evolve so that you can be a better leader in the future of work. Again, that is 6leadershiptrends.com. You can either spell out the number 6 in the URL or just use the number 6 in the URL. They will both take you to the same place. Thanks again for tuning in.